Hello and good morning. Thanks for being with us. World leaders are paying tribute to Mikhail Gorbachev, who died last night at the age of 91. President Joe Biden says that Gorbachev created freedom for millions of people, while Boris Johnson has praised his courage and integrity. President Vladimir Putin offered only condolences, underscoring the mixed legacy of a man credited with ending the Cold War, but who oversaw the collapse of the Soviet Union. Diana Magne reports now from Moscow.
Mikhail Gorbachev came to power at a time when the USSR was seen as the evil empire, locked in a nuclear arms race with the United States. Under his leadership, the Cold War would finally come to an end, but the Soviet Union would collapse. He was a new kind of Soviet leader, able to engage easily with his people, a man Western leaders could do business with. But he inherited a superpower with a failing economy, which he knew could no longer afford the Cold War. In the White House, he found a president equally interested in reducing nuclear weapons. Their signature agreement to ban short and medium-range ballistic missiles, halting the nuclear arms race.
Yes, Mr. General Secretary, though my pronunciation may give you difficulty, the maxim is doverjai no proverjai. Trust but verify.
На каждой встрече вы это повторяете.
He introduced glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring. As the Berlin Wall came down, he refused to intervene, even as the communist regimes of Eastern Europe collapsed. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize the following year. But not everyone was celebrating. Conservative hardliners attempted a coup d'etat. The people, under Boris Yeltsin, pushed back. After 3 days, the coup collapsed, but the balance of power had shifted away from Gorbachev, and on Christmas Day 1991, he had no choice but to resign.
На посту президента СССР.
The Soviet Union was no more, but it would usher in a decade of chaos, which many in Russia would blame him for. Gorbachev remained critical of his successors in the Kremlin, and especially of Vladimir Putin, a man whose long decades in power saw the freedoms which Gorbachev had won for his people crushed.
Что такое безгласная страна? Это мертвецы, живые мертвецы.
The Russian president has expressed his deepest condolences. US President Joe Biden calling Gorbachev's reforms the acts of a rare leader, one with the imagination to see that a different future was possible and the courage to risk his entire career to achieve it.
All right, let's cross now live to Moscow, where we can bring in Diana Magne, whose report you just saw. Diana, good morning to you. So, how is this news being received in Moscow?
Well, it happened late last night, so I don't think this is the last that we'll hear from Vladimir Putin, who's expressed his condolences and who said that he will send a telegram to his family today. I think it is hard to overstate the legacy of the man, the impact he had on 20th century politics. And if you think about it, he is the last of that generation of world leaders after Helmut Kohl and George Bush Sr. to pass away, all of whom had real respect for each other's values, for each other's desire for peaceful ways of achieving a new post-Soviet world order. But I think that his legacy is extremely conflicted, and there are many people in this country who resent the way that he is celebrated abroad, who during his time in office felt that he wasn't pushing through his reforms far enough, others who blame him for the collapse of the Soviet Union and the chaos which this country went through in the 1990s. And I think you will feel a lot of that sentiment coming out in the next few days. He will be buried in 3 days' time, a family burial, we're hearing, where he'll be laid to rest next to his beloved wife, Raisa, who died in 1999. And he has had a long time without her, a woman he really looked to for his counsel, for his everything. And I think in these last few years, and especially in these last few 6 months, it must have been profoundly disturbing for Mikhail Gorbachev to look at the kind of Russia that Vladimir Putin had turned his country into.
OK, Diana, for now in Moscow, appreciate that. Thank you. All right, let's go to Ukraine now, where a convoy of nuclear inspectors has set off the plant that's controlled by Russian forces and has been since the early days of the invasion of Ukraine. Let's bring in our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, who is in the city of Kryvyi Rih. Deborah, good morning to you. So just bring us up to speed where we are with this convoy of inspectors, where they're going and what their plans are.
So they set off from Kyiv this morning. They're heading for the city of Zaporizhia, the region of Zaporizhia, and from there they're going to be accessing this nuclear plant, which has been under Russian control since March. And there have been growing concerns that clashes around the area could damage the plant and trigger some kind of nuclear catastrophe. The head of the IAEA, who is actually part of the mission, says that they're going to be spending a number of days at the site. They want to assess the situation, get a sense of how serious it is in terms of the safety concerns, and then establish a permanent presence there. He's very clear this is a war zone they're entering into. They need guarantees from both sides that their team and himself will be protected. He says he's got that, and the mission is underway. And at the same time here in Ukraine, we have the third day now of a major counter-offensive by Ukrainian forces against Russian troops into Russian-held territory. The UK Defence Ministry is saying that Ukraine has gone some distance in places into Russia-controlled territory. We've not been able to have access ourselves, but we've seen a lot of images on social media showing the explosions from the Ukrainian offensive.
OK, Deborah, for now in Kryvyi Rih, speech again. Thank you. Right now, the US Department of Justice says that there were efforts to obstruct its investigation into the discovery of classified documents at Donald Trump's house in Florida. The DOJ has released this image showing documents marked top secrets on a carpet at Mar-a-Lago. The Department of Justice added the records were likely concealed and removed from a storage room even after the former president's representatives had assured officials that they'd thoroughly searched the property. The FBI also seized 33 boxes containing more than 100 classified records during its search earlier this month and found 3 classified documents stashed in drawers. More on that story throughout the day. Now, there's a fresh cost of living squeeze today, with the war in Ukraine being blamed for a surge in prices at shops and supermarkets around the country. The British Retail Consortium says that shop price annual inflation accelerated to 5.1% in August, up from a 4.5% the month before. That's the biggest jump it's ever recorded. Now, the biggest driver of these prices is fresh food, which is up 10.5%. The rise in shop and supermarket costs is contributing to wider inflation across the country, which some analysts predict could top 18% next year. Well, let's bring in Emma Birchley, who's at New Covent Garden Market in South London. Emma, good morning to you. So you've got a nice bag of onions there next to you, but how much more are these things going to be costing people?
They're going to be costing people so much more, and actually you don't need statistics and reports to tell you what we're all feeling every day, and that is that when you go and buy your food, it costs much more than it used to. Here, you couldn't get food much fresher. It's going to schools, it's going to restaurants, pubs, hospitality industry. But come and look, right, onions, up 10%. War in Ukraine is obviously an issue, but here in this country, it's droughts, it's the heat wave. New crop potatoes, they're much smaller this year. They are up 40% in price, but come along here and look at the watermelon. So normally, these would cost Nature's Choice, which is where we are today, about £2. They are now costing them £5, and that obviously all gets passed on. So when it comes to stuff in this country, we're talking about the heat, the lack of rain. But, of course, the war in Ukraine is having a major impact. When it comes to things like watermelons, mangoes are the same. they're having to be flown in to be at their absolute best quality, and the air fuel costs are so high, and that is partly why we are feeling this real pinch and why everything is costing us so much more.
For now, do appreciate that. Thank you. All right, let's bring in the Housing Minister now for what the government is going to be doing about this cost of living crisis. I'm pleased to say we're joined by Marcus Jones. Marcus Jones, good morning to you. So we've seen the British Retail Consortium saying that prices are going up in the shops. We know that inflation is likely to top at least 12% next year. I mean, what is the government going to be doing to make sure that people can get through this crisis they're facing for the next few months?
Well, it's a hugely challenging time for people, and I don't underestimate how difficult it is. I can see that in my own constituency in Nuneaton, where local people are struggling with the cost of living and where many businesses are also being affected, particularly by the war in Ukraine and energy prices. And the main thing that the government's done so far is to provide a £37 billion package of support for people. That's £1,200 to the lowest paid families, and they'll be receiving that from now across into the autumn. Then pensioners will be receiving £850 in support, and every household will receive £400 in support during this package that we have in the autumn. But I've absolutely no doubt that there is more to be done. People are finding things very, very difficult. And I know that both contenders in the leadership contest, and we're going to have a new Prime Minister next week, both of those candidates have talked extensively about the cost of living. And I know that will be number one in terms of their priorities when they take office. And certainly I know once we get back to Parliament next week, it will be a discussion that is being had constantly, because people across the country will know from being constituency MPs what a challenging time this is for the people they represent.
Yeah, so you accept that the package put forward by the person you're supporting in his previous job for leadership, Rishi Sunak, is inadequate, so more will need to be done. What about the idea of freezing prices at this point? So you've seen that there is growing support. You've seen the front page of some of the newspapers this morning. Huge support for that idea across the country to freeze prices right now.
Well, this has been a very fast-moving situation. Clearly, the energy price cap has now been announced to come into effect during the autumn. Clearly, we've then got further announcements that are likely to be made in January. The support given is significant. It's £37 billion. That is a huge amount of money, but clearly
that's going to be inadequate, don't we, Mr. Jones? We know.
Well,
We've known for some weeks that that's going to be inadequate, haven't we?
I've already
that's
made
the
it
question,
very,
why there's not more coming now.
I've already made it very clear, Kamali, that more needs to be done. I think it's important that the current Prime Minister has given the opportunity to the new Prime Minister to look at the situation and to make decisions accordingly from the beginning of next week. But absolutely, I'm in no doubt that more will need to be done to help people. As for freezing the price of energy, clearly that's been suggested, and clearly I'm sure I can understand why people are drawn to that. But clearly we're dealing with a worldwide energy price here. And if anything is done, it's clearly the taxpayer, together with other measures, and clearly we've put the levy currently on energy companies, but clearly a package of measures is required, and targeted support is needed for those who need it most.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't sound like you're saying necessarily that you're against the idea of freezing prices there.
Well, I'm in favour of bringing measures forward that are going to help people, particularly targeted measures, and very much the package that's already been put forward. The most vulnerable in society will have £1,200 basically towards their energy costs. If they've got somebody disabled in the family, that will be £1,350. And the announcement that I came on to make today was about capping social rent, so that 1.7 million of people that don't get any help with their housing costs from the taxpayer, they will have protection on their social rents, so that their rent bill will be £300 less than it would have been next year.
Yeah, and that £300, of course, will be very valuable to lots of people. But as you said, it's next year. There's a consultation that has to go through the process now. You know, £300 off their rent over the year coming next year is not going to help anyone whose bill's going up on the 1st of October.
Well, clearly, it's important that we give people certainty and we give them reassurance, and that's what we've got to do going forward with any further package. I think people will be reassured more when they start to receive the £37 billion that's coming out. Some of that has already started to be received by families, but the lion's share of that is going out across the autumn months. The electricity companies this month are starting to knock the amount of money that we're providing off people's electricity bills, and for those on prepayment meters, they will have an amount credited each month to make up that £400 we're providing. But I'm under no illusion whatsoever that more will need to be done, and I'm looking forward to the new Prime Minister coming in next week, and I'm sure the new Prime Minister, whether that is Rishi or it's Liz, will be very aware of the difficulties that people are going through, and will start to set out how they're going to help people across this very, very tough period.
Now, this cap on rental prices, this will affect people in social housing. It'll affect housing association tenants as well, won't it?
It will support housing association tenants as well. There's about 4 million people or 4 million households that this will help, but particularly those 1.7 million of those households where those households do not claim any form of housing benefit, and therefore they will find that next year, rather than the situation that they were likely to face, which was an 11% hike in their cost of their rent next year, we're looking at restricting that to 5%, trying to get the balance between the tenants who need to support with the cost of living and housing associations and local authorities who we expect to continue to make repairs and improvements to property and build new social housing so that we have more social housing stock for people to live in.
Yeah, absolutely right, which is what people want to see. But this policy, when I read it this morning, I was very interested because it sounded quite familiar to me, and it's very similar to what the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn proposed in 2019 on putting a cap on prices. There it is in the Labour manifesto, rent cap. Labour will stop runaway rents by capping them with inflation, giving cities power to cap rents further. 2019, Jeremy Corbyn manifesto pledge, and now it's being recycled by you guys.
Well, this is very different because this is about social rents. This is about properties that have received significant taxpayer funding to originally build. And
Mr. Corbyn's policy covered that as well, didn't it, Marcus Jones? It covered that.
It did cover that. And you may recall, Kamali, that a previous Conservative government between 2015 and 2020 did a similar thing before Jeremy Corbyn came out with his announcement. But I think what Jeremy Corbyn was aiming at was a rent cap in the private rented sector, which would be disastrous for people because it's likely to lead to a massive reduction in the amount of homes available for social rent and leave many, many people out of the home who are not in a position to purchase a home using a mortgage.
I mean, what pushback do you expect to get on this from local councils and I think more specifically housing association that they're privately run businesses?
Well, I've had a number of private conversations on this issue with housing providers in the social sector since I took this role on in July. I think they recognise the difficulties that are out there for their tenants, and clearly they want to make sure that their rents are still being paid. They also want any policy that's brought forward to be balanced in the context of being able to still make repairs to properties and still being able to develop new properties. I'm not saying this policy will leave them jumping for joy, but I think it strikes the right balance. And I think many social housing providers will understand why the government are proposing the action that we are.
Yeah, well, hopefully, for your sake, they will understand. Just a final question then to you, Marcus Jones. Boris Johnson yesterday didn't rule out trying to make a comeback. I mean, how useful is that after all this time, months of this leadership contest and the fractures it's brought to your party, for Mr Johnson to still be saying he might well come back in the future and try and lead again?
Well, I think it's important now that we focus on the future. Clearly, Boris of his own volition, decided to resign as the leader of the party for the reasons that we all know. Clearly, we're going through a leadership contest which concludes at the beginning of next week. That's my focus. We should now get behind whoever the leader is, whether that is Rishi or Liz come next Monday. It's beholden on the whole of the Conservative Parliamentary Party to do that, because we must focus on the big issues that affect the people and the big issues that the people are expecting answers on. So I don't think we should keep dwelling on this type of question. It is a hypothetical question, and I think we will need to see how Boris reacts to not being the Prime Minister. Clearly, different ex-Prime Ministers have reacted in different ways. David Cameron stepped down in 2016, and clearly Theresa May's carried on after 2019 and made a significant contribution in Parliament. So I think we should see how that plays out. But my focus is absolutely on who the new leader is likely to be and supporting that leader, come what may, to make sure that we are delivering for the people in what is a very, very difficult, critical time for the country.
So, right, OK, Marcus Jones, Minister for Housing, do appreciate your time this morning. Thanks for being with us. Thank you. All right, let me bring you a little bit of breaking news that's coming into us here at Sky. British staff at 9 train operators, as well as train infrastructure owner Network Rail, are going to walk out on a 24-hour strike beginning on the 26th of September. This is over pay and conditions. The Transport Salaried Staffs Association said it will still be in talks with Network Rail about a possible settlement. All right, let's bring in our political correspondent, Amanda Akas, who is with us now live. Good morning to you, Amanda. So, we've got more worrying news coming from the British Retail Consortium, and also there, Marcus Jones saying that the government was going to do more eventually.
Yes, I mean, he said he was no doubt that more needs to be done, and also said that the cost of living crisis is the #1 priority for both candidates in the Conservative leadership race as well. Of course, it is really. I mean, the Prime Minister himself, Boris Johnson, yesterday, who is still, of course, in power until Tuesday, also reiterated this message that further support would be coming down the line from both candidates. We know that civil servants in the Treasury, for example, are working on potential different options depending on what the winner of the contest decides to do. But fundamentally, there's still no real detail on those options, what they are looking at, which now that we do know what the energy price cap increase is going to be, we found out on Friday it'll be going up to £3,500 in October from just under £2,000 at present. We've heard those figures from the British Retail Consortium showing how quickly food prices are going up too. People are trying to budget for the winter, and there is a growing clamour for more detail to be released quickly. We know that Liz Truss, for example, she's pledging to cut the increase in national insurance that we've seen and pause green levies on energy bills. Mr Sunak saying that he wants to see targeted support going to the most vulnerable pensioners and those on lowest incomes. But it does indeed look like we're going to have to wait until Tuesday when we find out who the next Prime Minister is before we really have any more detail on that. We'll all keep waiting. Amanda, for now, appreciate that. Thank you. All right, let's take a look at the morning's front pages now, and many of them have pictures of Mikhail Gorbachev on the front page. This is the front page of The Guardian, as you can see there, paying tributes to Mr Gorbachev, and also the main story on The Guardian there is fears that food banks are about to run out of stock. The Times front page too has Gorbachev. Their main story is about a plan to use the NHS app to allow patients to see where in the country has the shortest waiting times for their particular treatment. The Eye leads with calls from small businesses for Liz Truss to save them from a 400% energy price hike if she were to become Prime Minister next week. Financial Times has an interview with Rishi Sunak warning about the dangers of financial markets losing confidence in the UK if Truss wins and implements her suggested policies of tax cuts. While The Sun reports on Meghan Markle's comments about people comparing her to Nelson Mandela. All right, some of your morning's other headlines now. And Centrica, the company which owns British Gas, has been given permission to reopen its gas storage facility in the North Sea. The facility in question once provided about 70% of the UK's gas storage capacity. The supplier says it's prepared to spend the £2 billion needed to make the site operational again. It was closed 4 years ago.
Now, people with a hard-to-treat superbug that affects the gut, known as Clostridium difficile, are to be offered fecal transplants to tackle their infections. The National Institute for Health and Care Excellence says that gut bacteria taken from a healthy person's poo can restore healthy function. It can be taken orally in a capsule. Now, NASA says it will make a second attempt today, debut launch of its rocket on Saturday, 5 days after technical issues forced it to abort its initial attempt. There it is on the launch pad. But there are concerns about what the weather has in store for the next few days in Florida. NASA's weather officer says they see a 60% no-go chance for Saturday. It'd be good if it got up, wouldn't it? Now, a new report has found that the cost of food is rising at its fastest rate in more than a decade. That's according to the British Retail Consortium, as what Emma was telling us about earlier from Covent Garden Market. They saw that shops rose by 5.1% in August, but food price increased by 9.3%. Well, let's bring in the External Affairs Advisor for the British Retail Consortium, Emma Revel. Emma Revel, good morning to you. So just take us through some of these figures. Why are we seeing these numbers go up so quickly?
So as you said, general shop prices increased 5.1% in the 3 months to August, but for food, that's 9.3%. And that's been driven primarily by the war in Ukraine. It's a combination of increased grain costs and also demand and difficulties getting vegetable oil out of the country, which means that products that use vegetable oil quite intensively, such as crisps and butter and things like milk, are rising in price because the cost of grain and therefore animal feed is increasing, meaning it's costing farmers more to keep and feed the animals, which then obviously leads to the cost of things like milk and eggs increasing.
Now, of course, the war in Ukraine is going to be ongoing. It's got no ends in sight. So what can be done to try and bring food prices down in the short term?
Well, retailers are doing everything they can to try and absorb as much of the cost as possible by expanding their value ranges and freezing prices on essential goods. But there's only so much that retailers can do. So, our biggest ask of the new government is to address the business rates burden. It's an enormous tax on retail, and even just inflation is likely to add £3 billion to the bill for the next year. So we're asking the government to address that, to unlock additional investment. If that money isn't being spent on business rates, retailers are able to absorb more of the costs and invest in, the efficiency and the productivity of their businesses and their workforce.
And are you hearing that might be a possibility from one of the candidates?
They've both signalled a willingness to, bring the tax burden down and to look at, business taxes. So, we are hopeful, but it is sort of a critical thing that we need to see addressed, along with the cost of energy, which not only affects, viewers in their houses, but, factories, shops, the whole supply chain in retail is affected by that as well.
I mean, are retailers that you speak to, do they feel like they've been sort of let down or left to just wait in anticipation, like the rest of us, for some kind of plan to help them get through this cost of living crisis?
Well, what retailers are doing is being quite proactive. They recognise, obviously, that the essential goods are essential for a reason, and that it's important to do everything they can to freeze those prices and to expand those ranges at a time when people are struggling. So retailers are doing everything they can. They just want to see, government support alongside that to help them with their investment.
OK, Emma Revel from the British Retail Consortium. Appreciate your time this morning. Thank you for being with us. Now, if you can scan that QR code on your screen right now, because you've got your phone in your hand, you can listen to the latest edition of the Sky News Daily. Today, with the price of energy biting, Neil Patterson speaks to the forgotten businesses in the crisis and asks what the future holds for employers. You can subscribe to the Daily for free wherever you get your podcasts. All right, time now for a look at what the weather has in store.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, the weather looks to be fairly settled for the next few days, but things will turn wet and windy at the weekend. Now, at the moment, most places are looking fine and dry, and there is some good sunshine around. It's chilly in northeast Scotland, while around southern coasts, there's quite a keen wind. We're seeing more cloud in the east, and this is giving some light showers.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, stars from the world of music and film are coming together to celebrate the life of the late entrepreneur Jamal Edwards, including this man. Now, as you probably know, Ed Sheeran and Jamal Edwards worked together in Ed's early careers, counted as one of Jamal's biggest success stories. Now, Mr. Sheeran, Idris Elba, Jessie Ware and others will gather at the first fundraising event for the Jamal Edwards Trust next month. All the money raised at the gala will go towards supporting young people who are looking to thrive in the media industry. All right. It's a good cause. Now, let's take a look at some of the morning's best picture stories from this morning's newspapers. And there you go. Played a few games like that myself. That is a wet football match in Gloucestershire. It didn't put them off. But he's wearing running shoes. Not great for grip. Now, the two teams took part in the annual football match in the river in Burton on the Water. It certainly was on the water. It finished 0-0, I'm not sure, now in Wales. The annual bog snorkeling competition has been taking place. Yes, people snorkel in bogs because why not? Competitors aim to complete 2 lengths of a 55-metre water-filled trench cut through the peat bog in the shortest time possible. And to make it more difficult and more interesting, they wear fancy dresses. You can see there was a shark there, Santas and various different fish. Well done to all of you guys. And finally, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have been invited to meet their Lego doppelgangers to celebrate their move to Windsor. There is a Lego mock-up of the moving van. That is excellent. William, Kate, Prince George, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis and dog Orla will be displayed and packing their Lego brick furniture. That is great. My son will love that. Hello and welcome back to Pakistan now, where devastating flooding has killed more than 1,000 people. The United Nations has launched an appeal for emergency aid. A third of Pakistan is said to be underwater, with the south and central parts of the country worst affected. Now, the province of Sindh has had nearly 6 times as much rain as it would normally get in an average monsoon season. 47 million people live there, but only a tiny fraction have received aid. Just 100,000 tents, 50,000 food packs and around 2,000 hygiene kits. Sky's Shaima Mohsen reports from Dadu.
There were homes here once, children playing, and a community. Now everything is submerged in a never-ending vista of water. The people of Umri, now perched carefully on a muddy mound they've been forced to call home. A third of Pakistan is now underwater. In a country this big, that's difficult to comprehend. An estimated 33 million people affected, and the country is struggling to keep up with need for aid, with the Navy and Army drafted in to help.
Pakistani officials are unequivocal. They believe this is a very real consequence of climate change. Its citizens have been experiencing extreme weather conditions that have come together in an extraordinary nexus, starting with a heat wave that saw temperatures right here in Sindh province reaching 53 degrees. And in the north of the country, those soaring temperatures caused the glaciers to melt, sending water gushing down into Pakistan's major rivers. And then we are now in the midst of a monster monsoon. This is not a river that has broken its banks. It's rainfall settling on dry ground.
Here on the outskirts of Dadu, the families told us of their escape and anger at the lack of support.
I've got little children. We just managed to save them, but why isn't anybody helping us? The landowners and authorities here don't care about us.
Pakistan is amongst some of the lowest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, but its small carbon footprint will not save it from global climate change. Its people will be and are amongst the worst affected. For now, they have escaped the water and build skeletal shelters to escape the heat of the sun.
Pleased to say we can go live to Dadu now, where Saima is standing by for us. Good morning to you, Saima. So, look, just tell us, what's the situation like on the ground right now?
Kamali, we're really feeling the effects of the extreme weather. It's since early morning here, the temperatures have been extremely high, which behind me you can probably see all three reasons that I just explained in my report for what is impacting Pakistan right now. Extreme heat, dry ground, water absolutely everywhere. As we've driven to Mali, I have hundreds and hundreds of people on the sides of roads. If you can see just behind me or over my left shoulder here, there's people who have created temporary homes using sticks and pieces of cloth. Some of them have taken off their scarves to use that as some form of protection from either the heat or the rain, what little protection that will offer them. We haven't actually found many aid drops in this particular area. I know that Pakistani forces have made an international appeal, of course, because they are struggling to reach the capacity and resources that they need for the 33 million people affected.
Now, appreciate that. Now, let's bring in Pakistan's climate change minister. That is Miss Shadi Rahman, who is in Islamabad for us this morning. Miss Rahman, good to have you with us, and thank you for joining us. Just tell us, what is the situation like for the recovery effort in the affected areas right now?
Well, thank you very much for that excellent report from Dadu. Your reporter at least was sensitive to conditions on the ground. As you can see, they're absolutely disastrous. We are in the middle of a converging of multiple climate impacts, and it's a perfect storm, if you like. And so the relief efforts to service, frankly, more than 33 million people that have been assessed is gargantuan. We are stretched to the maximum. People, not just our military, but our civilians are pitching in now because food packs, basic hygiene, items, and then obviously the shelters. Even the tents are not enough. For the first 2 weeks, our helicopters were not able to do the normal relief and rescue and evacuations because they could not get off the ground, and the Navy had to be employed. It's been absolutely unprecedented and relentless. Even today, from 7%, 700%, the rainfall is at 500%. The temperatures are too high otherwise, and 53 degrees is uninhabitable for the summer. We never had a spring, and it is becoming a challenge that is of epic proportions. We are very clear. There is, at this point, we are at maximum overstretch.
Yeah, and you say maximum and overstretched. So that begs the question, is the government up to dealing with this? What assistance does Pakistan need from the international community?
Yes, we have asked, of course. I don't think any particular government in this collapsed time, in the telescope time we have available to reach our people, not just to provide them relief, but to actually rescue them from different sets of districts where, multiple kinds of storms are hitting them. The north is very different. The Cascades there race down. The water may be less. Here, the water is just sitting on the ground because Sindh is flat. Most of Balochistan is flat. So, yes, we require a great deal of actually urgent cash assistance because the cash grants are going out. And I was just speaking to the BISP minister, the Benazir Income Support Program. We'll soon be running out of urgent resources to transfer to the most vulnerable families. And it's a huge amount. It's 35 billion right now. It is on its way. But at the same time, food is needed on the ground, cooked food, shelter, hygiene kits, now even doctors and medical camps, because many will be in need of medical care. There is a threat of epidemics, waterborne diseases, because as we know, the mosquito cover is getting very dense, especially in the night. There's a dengue scare and many other waterborne diseases, especially diarrhea for the children and the women. So, we have 1/3 of Pakistan is underwater. How do we service their relief, rescue, even find dry ground? In parts of Sindh, there wasn't dry ground until today. I mean, it's mostly today, even the famous highway on both sides of the Indus, on the middle of the Indus, that huge artery, has been inundated. It's not a river bursting banks. It is just the water falling down.
And
so
there's more rain predicted as well, isn't there, Mr. Rahman?
Sorry?
More rain expected to come as well?
Come again?
I'm asking if the forecast is showing that there is more rain due for the region.
Heard that the Met Office tells us that mid-September we need to brace for more. But I mean, really, what do we do? How many shelters are we going to rebuild, and how many people can be relocated to dry land? We have a very large population, and out of 160 districts, which includes AJK and Gilgit-Baltistan, 110 districts have been actually affected, and 72 declared calamity hit. So that's more than 1/3 of Pakistan. That's really, frankly, it's more than half. So how are we going to service this? We are running a war room, and that's why I haven't been able to leave Islamabad except for sporadic trips down south and north. But we're running a war room here. We're needing to run more than one because 24/7, we are still unable to meet the services and dire survival needs of people on the front lines of what really is a climate catastrophe, and the climate catastrophe of the decade, quite honestly.
Yeah, and on the funding amounts, the UK government says up to £1.5 million will be sent to help with the flood relief. Is that enough?
Well, that's very kind, but it's mostly our repurposed development loans. I do believe they're working on more. That's a drop in the ocean. We appreciate every drop because the drops pile up. But right now, in an emergency, we're not sneezing at any assistance. We appreciate the spirit behind it, but we really need a lot more. I mean, just the relief efforts, we were doing back of the envelopes, and now it's really real. Calculations, the finance minister and I were calculating just the relief efforts, just the basic cash transfers. First round of relief efforts is going to cost us $1 billion. Then the basic reconstruction, not counting the crop losses, because Sindh is half the bread basket of Pakistan. The crop is all gone. And now we're hearing reports of power looms shutting down naturally because they're inundated and people are losing jobs. So it's one of those, multiple impacts coming together to form a very kind of critical dynamic at this point. And $10 billion, which the finance ministers calculated, in my view, will not go beyond just basic rehabilitation and some sectors of the economy recovering. This will not cover critical climate rebuilding back, climate resilience, infrastructure, because many of the bridges in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, many of the highways and roads, strong metal roads, have just been wiped out. Many were built back better after the 2010 super flood. According to international standards, they've all been wiped out because the speed, scale, and velocity of the water, either coming down or coming down from the Indus, depending which part of the country you're in. So it's really, I mean, today I see 5,063 kilometers of roads gone. Yesterday the figure was, less than that. And 243 bridges down. They are trying to rebuild some of them, but it's very hard with torrential rains, as well as, the river Indus now beginning its traditional riverine outflow from the north, where the glaciers are melting. Those torrents are very different from the ones that we're seeing in Sindh. And the problems are also quite, it's the biggest hydromet disaster of in living memory that I've seen. And I can recommend as the climate minister or changing our agriculture systems. I can recommend, it's easy for me to advise that, you can rebuild the entire irrigation architecture.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we have run short of time. You have made your point very forcefully, and we hope that you get the funding that you need to try and help those millions, tens of millions of people who are affected. Thank you. Ms. Sherry Rahman, Minister for Climate Change for Pakistan. Thank you. All right, let's get a little look at the situation for humanitarian organisations working on the ground. I'm pleased to say we're joined by Arif Jabbar Khan, who is a country director for Water Aid in Pakistan. Mr. Arif Jabbar, just talk to us about the situation that you guys are finding yourselves in and the work that you're having to do.
Yeah, well, as our honourable minister said, I think it is gigantic. And even the relief effort is quite difficult, and not only now, but I think it has long-term implications for the country because, where your reporter Saima was, I actually saw people, I am 100 miles south of where she is, and people have traveled all this distance from there in search of relief goods in the city of Hyderabad, and I'm sure it's happening in other cities. And what they're doing is basically occupying whatever place they can. I just visited, a college where there were 800 people living, and it's only the philanthropic support they are getting there. And, we are trying to mobilize some response there. But I think the scale of the response is much bigger than anyone can imagine. And I was, as others have said, I was here in the 2010 response as well, and there the water just came and flew. It went down, and we were able to plan accordingly. Now, what is happening is it started in the first we had the heat wave in the south and the north, and more rains coming in. So even the response efforts are being hampered by the climatic, the weather conditions that we are faced with right now.
Okay, Mr. Arif Jabbar Khan, I'm sorry, we have run short of time. I do appreciate you being with us this morning, and we wish you all the very best of luck in your work and in the recovery effort. Thank you for now.
Thank you.
All right, let me just bring you a little bit more on the second day of those Royal Mail strikes as 115,000 workers walk off the job. We can speak now to John Carson, who's a postman and Assistant Secretary of the Communication Workers Union based in Glasgow. John Carson, good to have you with us. So the Royal Mail say they've offered you a 5.5% pay rise. Is that true?
Well, I mean, it's true that they have offered, or they have claimed to offer 5.5%, but it's attached with many strings, and there's a number of hoops you'd have to jump through to get there. What they have done so far is they have imposed 2% pay rise on the workforce without negotiation, without agreement with the trade union, the CWU. And, the way things are with inflation, that's not going to pay our bills. Our members are seriously struggling. When it comes to that, you've got some members here working 60, 70 hours every single week, working 6 days a week. Some people are working 7 days a week, and we can't survive on that 2%. It's no good enough, especially when we look at the hundreds of millions of pounds in profit the companies have been making, and also the hundreds of thousands of pounds it's been paying out to CEOs, and millions of pounds it's been paying out to shareholders.
Yeah, I mean, is it a tough spot for posties right now, though? Because, the company will say that they want to see modernisation, which, means streamlining, which may mean jobs going if you want to get the pay for some of your members that you think they deserve.
I mean, I have to say right away that modernisation has been an aspect of the postal service for decades now. We have seen a reduction in the workforce because of mechanisation, and obviously the union and the workers have been working with that, day after day. Delivery postal workers like myself, we've been dealing with change, on the streets every single day. You used to have 2 deliveries, now you have 1 delivery. We've been using new technologies, whether it's capturing photo images of parcels. And then when you look at the mail centre operation, we have massive machines, monstrous machines that deal with parcels. So we've been part of that process, and we don't disagree with that process. But what the union is saying very clearly, we will not accept this. You accept pay which isn't high enough, or your terms and your conditions and your jobs are going. We can't accept that. We can't live by that. We're not going to... that's not a trade-off that we want. We are saying the work that was done over COVID, the work that was done in the pandemic, postal workers absolutely deserve a no-strings pay award because of that, especially when the money is going out to those who are in charge of the company.
Yeah, and of course the company will say that, you know, they find it difficult to meet those demands. So where does this go from here then, John? I mean, how much more industrial action are we going to see, and how much more disruption are customers going to see?
Well, to be honest now, that I think is very much in Royal Mail's hands. I mean, the union is open for further negotiations, further talks. The workforce here are absolutely solid because at the end of the day, we just can't live on what is being offered or what has been imposed so far. And ultimately as well, you know, we have an obligation, a duty and a service and a deep connection with local communities. And one of the fundamental questions about this is about whether the work of a postal worker is to be determined by the market or whether it's to be determined by its social and its community value. So we want to be back out in the streets. We want to be out working with our people, you know, as we have all through the pandemic, especially the most vulnerable in our society. We want to be doing that job. But ultimately, the decision is with Royal Mail, who is trying to drive this, you know, a market agenda that is trying to undermine the terms and conditions and the pay and value of a postal worker, where we know that communities value those services far more highly than that. And that's why we need to see everybody back around the table so that we get a proper pay award for everything that we have done.
OK, John Carson from the CWU in Glasgow. Thanks for your time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, well, those strikes will go on. Now, let me just show you a bit of footage that shows the huge amount of junk left behind by people who went to Reading Festival over the weekend. Every year, it's terrible, but this looks particularly bad. Maybe it's just those drone shots. Now, they've left tents, bottles, sleeping bags, everything. It's just a mess now. They show hundreds of thousands of abandoned tents. Now, police had to say that they wanted people to try and clean up. This is kids who probably should know better, but the police were called after there were burning of tents at this year's Reading Festival. The headliners, of course, don't condone any of that, and the Arctic Monkeys played, which was very nice. All right, we'll have more from the show after the break.